Welcome back. I am Pemberton, and this is Book 3, Part 3. The tent is built, now it is filled. We begin with the priesthood Aaron and his sons set apart, anointed, and robed, and with a warning, for 2 of those sons will die at the very altar. Then Josephus, who was himself a priest, takes us through the worship of his people as no outsider could, the kinds of sacrifice and exactly how each was offered, the great festivals of the year, the Passover, the Feast of Weeks, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles, and the laws of cleanness and purification that hedge the whole life of the camp. He ends with a long, plain list of the statutes themselves, laws of justice, of property, of marriage, of mercy to the poor and the stranger. It is the constitution of a people, read out by one of its own priests. Some of it will surprise you. Let us go on.
When the work already described had been completed, but before the gifts had yet been presented, God appeared to Moses and commanded him to bestow the high priesthood on his brother Aaron, as the man who best deserved that honor because of his virtue. Moses gathered the multitude together, and told them about Aaron's virtue, his goodwill toward them, and the dangers he had undergone for their sake. When they gave testimony in every respect to Aaron's worth and showed that they were ready to receive him, Moses spoke to them. O Israelites, this work has now been completed in the way most acceptable to God, and according to our ability. Since you see that God has received this tabernacle, we shall first need someone to officiate for us, to minister at the sacrifices, and to offer the prayers that are to be made on our behalf. If the choice of such a person had been left to me, I would have thought myself worthy of this honor, both because all men are naturally fond of themselves, and because I know that I have taken great pains for your deliverance. But now God himself has judged Aaron worthy of this honor, and has chosen him as his priest, knowing him to be the most righteous person among you. Therefore Aaron is to put on the vestments consecrated to God. He is to care for the altars and provide for the sacrifices. He is to offer prayers to God for you, and God will readily hear them, not only because he himself is concerned for your nation, but also because he will receive them as offered by one whom he has chosen for this office. The Hebrews were pleased with what Moses said, and they approved the man whom God had ordained. Aaron was the most deserving of this honor among them all, because of his own lineage, his gift of prophecy, and his brother's virtue. At that time he had 4 sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Moses then commanded them to use all the utensils left over beyond what was needed for the structure of the tabernacle to cover the tabernacle itself, the candlestick, the altar of incense, and the other vessels, so that they would not be harmed on the journey either by rain or by rising dust. When he gathered the multitude together again, he ordained that every man should offer half a shekel as an oblation to God. A shekel is a coin among the Hebrews equal to 4 Athenian drachmae. They readily obeyed Moses' command. The number of those who offered was 605,550. This money was brought by free men, those about 20 years old but under 50, and what was collected was spent for the uses of the tabernacle. Moses now purified the tabernacle and the priests. Purification was performed in this way. He commanded them to take 500 shekels of choice myrrh, an equal quantity of kasha, and half that weight of cinnamon and calamus, this last being a kind of sweet spice. They were to beat these small, moisten them with a hin of olive oil, a hin being a measure of our country containing 2 Athenian choas or congiuses, then mix them together, boil them, prepare them according to the art of the apothecary, and make them into a very sweet ointment. Afterward they were to use it to anoint and purify the priests themselves, the whole tabernacle, and the sacrifices. There were also many kinds of sweet spices belonging to the tabernacle, very costly ones, brought to the golden altar of incense. I do not now describe their nature, lest it become burdensome to my readers. Incense was to be offered twice each day, before sunrise and at sunset. They were also to keep oil already purified for the lamps. 3 of the lamps on the sacred candlestick were to give light all day long before God, and the rest were to be lit in the evening. Now everything was finished. Bezaleel and Aholiab proved to be the most skillful of the workmen, for they invented finer works than any that had been made before them, and they had great ability to understand things of which they had previously been ignorant. Of these 2 Bezaleel was judged the best. The whole time spent on the work was 7 months. When it was finished, the first year since their departure from Egypt came to an end. At the beginning of the 2nd year, in the month called Xanthicus by the Macedonians and Nisan by the Hebrews, on the new moon, they consecrated the tabernacle and all its vessels, which I have already described. God showed that he was pleased with the work of the Hebrews. He did not allow their labor to be in vain, nor did he refuse to make use of what they had made. He came and sojourned with them and pitched his tabernacle in the holy house. He came to it in this manner. The sky was clear, but over the tabernacle alone there was a mist surrounding it. It was not such a very deep and thick cloud as appears in winter, nor so thin that men could see anything through it. From it dropped a sweet dew, one that showed the presence of God to those who desired and believed it. When Moses had given the workmen such honorary gifts as it was fitting for men who had worked so well to receive, he offered sacrifices in the open court of the tabernacle, as God had commanded him, a bull, a ram, and a kid of the goats for a sin offering. I shall speak about what we do in our sacred offices in my discourse on sacrifices, and there I shall tell in what cases Moses commanded us to offer a whole burnt offering, and in what cases the law permits us to share the offerings as food. Moses sprinkled Aaron's vestments, Aaron himself, and Aaron's sons with the blood of the animals that had been slain, and purified them with spring water and ointment. In this way they became God's priests. He consecrated them and their garments in this manner for 7 days together. He did the same to the tabernacle and to the vessels belonging to it, first with oil prepared with incense, as I have said, and then with the blood of bulls and rams, one of each kind slain day by day. On the 8th day he appointed a feast for the people, and commanded them to offer sacrifice according to their ability. They competed with one another and were eager to exceed each other in the sacrifices they brought, and so fulfilled Moses' commands. But while the sacrifices lay on the altar, a sudden fire was kindled among them of its own accord. It appeared to the eye like fire from a flash of lightning and consumed everything on the altar. At this point an affliction befell Aaron, considered as both a man and a father, but he endured it with true courage. He had firmness of soul in such accidents, and he believed that this calamity came upon him according to God's will. As I said before, he had 4 sons. The 2 older ones, Nadab and Abihu, did not bring the sacrifices Moses had commanded them to bring, but offered what they had formerly been accustomed to offer, and they were burned to death. When the fire rushed upon them and began to burn them, no one could quench it. In this way they died. Moses ordered their father and their brothers to take up their bodies, carry them outside the camp, and bury them magnificently. The multitude lamented them, and was deeply affected by the death that had come upon them so unexpectedly. But Moses begged their brothers and their father not to be troubled over them, and to prefer the honor of God above their grief for them, for Aaron had already put on his sacred garments. Moses himself refused all the honor that he saw the multitude ready to bestow on him, and attended to nothing except the service of God. He no longer went up to Mount Sinai, but entered the tabernacle and brought back answers from God to the things for which he prayed. His clothing was that of a private man, and in all other circumstances he behaved like one of the common people. He wished to appear without distinction from the multitude, yet to make it known that he did nothing except care for them. He also wrote down the form of their government, and the laws by obedience, to which they would live in a way pleasing to God and free from quarrels with one another. The laws he ordained were those God suggested to him, and I shall now speak about that form of government and those laws. I will now treat of something I omitted before concerning the garment of the high priest. Moses left no room for the evil practices of false prophets. If any such persons attempted to abuse divine authority, he left it to God to be present at the sacrifices when he pleased and to be absent when he pleased. He wanted this to be known not only to the Hebrews, but also to the foreigners who were there. As for the stones that, as I said before, the high priest bore on his shoulders, the sardonyxes, I think it unnecessary to describe their nature because they are known to everyone. One of them shone out when God was present at their sacrifices, namely the one that served like a button on his right shoulder. Bright rays darted from it, and were visible even to those farthest away, though this splendor was not previously natural to the stone. This has appeared wonderful to those who have not so indulged themselves in philosophy as to despise divine revelation. Yet I will mention something still more wonderful. By the 12 stones that the high priest bore on his breast, inserted into his breastplate, God declared beforehand when they would be victorious in battle. Before the army began to march, so great a splendor shone from them that all the people understood God was present to assist them. Because of this, the Greeks who revered our laws, and could not possibly contradict this, called the breastplate the oracle. His breastplate and this sardonyx stopped shining 200 years before I composed this book, because God was displeased at the transgressions of his laws. We shall speak further about these things on a more fitting occasion, but I will now continue my proposed narrative. Now that the tabernacle had been consecrated, and a regular order established for the priests, the multitude judged that God now dwelt among them. They turned to sacrifices and praises to God, as people delivered from every expectation of evil and now looking forward with hope to better times ahead. They also offered gifts to God, some common to the whole nation and others particular to themselves, tribe by tribe. The heads of the tribes joined together 2 by 2 and brought a wagon and a yoke of oxen. These amounted to 6 wagons, and they carried the tabernacle when the people journeyed. Besides this, each head of a tribe brought a bowl, a charger, and a spoon of 10 derricks, full of incense. The charger and the bowl were silver, and together they weighed 200 shekels, though the bowl cost no more than 70 shekels. These were full of fine flour mixed with oil, such as they used on the altar for sacrifices. They also brought a young bullock, a ram, and a year-old lamb for a whole burnt offering, and a goat for the forgiveness of sins. Each head of a tribe also brought other sacrifices called peace offerings, for each day 2 bulls, 5 rams, year-old lambs, and kids of the goats. These heads of tribes spent 12 days sacrificing, 1 head sacrificing each day. Moses no longer went up to Mount Sinai, but went into the tabernacle and learned from God what they were to do and what laws should be made. These laws were better than any devised by human understanding and proved to be firmly observed for all time to come, because they were believed to be the gift of God. Thus the Hebrews did not transgress any of those laws, either when tempted by luxury in times of peace or by distress in times of war. But I say no more about them here, because I have resolved to compose another work concerning our laws. I will now mention a few of our laws that concern purifications and similar sacred offices, since I have come, in passing, to the subject of sacrifices. These sacrifices were of two kinds. One kind was offered for private persons, and the other for the people in general. They were also performed in two different ways. In one kind, the animal that is slain is burned as a whole burnt offering, and from this the sacrifice receives its name. The other kind is a thank offering, intended to provide a feast for those who sacrifice. I will speak first of the former. If a private man offers a burnt offering, he must slay either a bull, a lamb, or a kid of the goats. The lamb or kid must be in its first year, though in the case of bulls he is permitted to sacrifice animals of greater age. All burnt offerings must be males. When they are slain, the priests sprinkle the blood around the altar. Then they cleanse the bodies, divide them into parts, salt them with salt, and lay them on the altar, while the pieces of wood are piled one upon another and the fire is burning. Next they carefully cleanse the feet and the inward parts of the sacrifices, and lay them with the rest to be purified by the fire, while the priests receive the hides. This is the way a burnt offering is offered. Those who offer thank offerings sacrifice the same kinds of creatures, but they must be unblemished and more than a year old. In this case, however, they may use either males or females. They also sprinkle the altar with the blood of the sacrifice. They lay on the altar the kidneys, the caul, all the fat, the lobe of the liver, and in the case of a lamb, the rump. Then they give the breast and the right shoulder to the priests. The offerers feast on the rest of the flesh for 2 days, and whatever remains after that they burn. Sacrifices for sins are offered in the same manner as the thank offering. But those who cannot afford complete sacrifices offer 2 pigeons or 2 turtle doves. One of these is made a burnt offering to God, and the other they give as food to the priests. We shall speak more precisely about the offering of these birds in our discourse on sacrifices. If someone falls into sin through ignorance, he offers a ewe lamb or a female kid of the goats of the same age. The priests sprinkle the blood at the altar, not in the former way, but on its corners. They also bring the kidneys and the rest of the fat, together with the lobe of the liver, to the altar. The priests take away the hides and the flesh and consume it in the holy place on that same day, for the law does not permit any of it to be left until morning. But if someone sins and is conscious of it himself, though no one can prove it against him, he offers a ram, as the law commands him to do. The priests eat its flesh as before in the holy place on the same day. If rulers offer sacrifices for their sins, they bring the same oblations as private men, except that they differ in this. They must bring as their sacrifice a bull or a kid of the goats, both of them males. The law requires, in both private and public sacrifices, that the finest flour also be brought. For a lamb the measure is 1/10, deal, for ram 2, and for a bull 3. They consecrate this on the altar after it has been mixed with oil, for oil is also brought by those who sacrifice. For a bull they bring half a hin of oil, for a ram a 1/3 part of the same measure, and for a lamb a 1/4 of it. This hin is an ancient Hebrew measure and is equal to 2 Athenian choas, or congeses. They bring the same quantity of wine as they do of oil, and they pour the wine around the altar. But if anyone does not offer a complete animal sacrifice, and instead brings only fine flour for a vow, he throws a handful of it on the altar as its first fruits. The priests take the rest for their food, either boiled or mixed with oil and made into cakes of bread. Whatever a priest himself offers must necessarily be entirely burned. The law forbids us to sacrifice any animal at the same time as its dam, and in other cases forbids sacrifice until the 8th day after its birth. Other sacrifices are also appointed for recovery from diseases or for other occasions. In these, meat offerings are consumed together with the animals sacrificed. It is not lawful to leave any part until the next day, except that the priests are to take their own share. The law requires that, at public expense, a lamb in its first year be killed every day, both at the beginning of the day and at its end. On the 7th day, which is called the Sabbath, they kill 2 lambs and sacrifice them in the same manner. At the new moon they perform the daily sacrifices and also slay 2 bulls, 7 lambs in their first year, and a kid of the goats for the expiation of sins, if they have sinned through ignorance. In the 7th month, which the Macedonians call VIII, they add to the sacrifices already mentioned and offer a bull, a ram, 7 lambs, and a kid of the goats for sins. On the 10th day of that same lunar month, they fast until evening. On that day they sacrifice a bull, 2 rams, 7 lambs, and a kid of the goats for sins. Besides these, they bring 2 kids of the goats. One is sent away alive beyond the limits of the camp into the wilderness as the scapegoat, to make expiation for the sins of the whole multitude. The other is brought into a place of great cleanness within the limits of the camp, and is burned there with its skin, without any kind of cleansing. Along with this goat they burn a bull, not brought by the people, but by the high priest at his own expense. When it is slain, he brings some of its blood into the holy place, together with the blood of the kid of the goats. With his finger he sprinkles the ceiling 7 times, and the pavement also, and then again as many times toward the most holy place and around the golden altar. At last he brings the blood into the open court and sprinkles it around the great altar. Besides this, they place the extremities, the kidneys, the fat, and the lobe of the liver on the altar. The high priest likewise presents a ram to God as a burnt offering. On the 15th day of the same month, when the season of the year is changing toward winter, the law commands us to pitch tabernacles in each of our houses, so that we may protect ourselves from the cold of that time of year. It also commands that when we arrive in our own country and come to the city that will then be our metropolis, because of the temple to be built there, we are to keep a festival for 8 days, offer burnt offerings, and sacrifice thank offerings. At that time we are to carry in our hands a branch of myrtle and willow, a bough of the palm tree, and the addition of the palm citron. The burnt offering on the first of those days is to be 13 bulls, 14 lambs, and 15 rams, with the addition of a kid of the goats as an expiation for sins. On the following days they offer the same number of lambs, rams, and kids of the goats, but reduce the number of bulls by 1 each day until they come down to only 7. On the 8th day all work is laid aside. Then, as we said before, they sacrifice to God a bullock, a ram, 7 lambs, and a kid of the goats for an expiation of sins. This is the customary solemnity of the Hebrews when they pitch their tabernacles. In the month of Xanthicus, which we call Nisan, and which is the beginning of our year, on the 14th day of the lunar month, when the sun is in Aries, the law ordained that every year we should slay the sacrifice that I have already said we slew when we came out of Egypt. This sacrifice is called the Passover, for it was in this month that we were delivered from bondage under the Egyptians. We celebrate this Passover in companies, leaving nothing of what we sacrifice until the following day. The Feast of Unleavened Bread follows the Passover. It falls on the 15th day of the month and continues for 7 days, during which they eat unleavened bread. On each of those days 2 bulls, 1 ram, and 7 lambs are killed. These lambs are entirely burned, besides the kid of the goats that is added to all the rest for sins, since it is intended as a feast for the priest on every one of those days. On the 2nd day of unleavened bread, which is the 16th day of the month, they first partake of the fruits of the earth, for before that day they do not touch them. Since they think it right to honor God first, from whom they receive this plentiful provision, they offer the first fruits of their barley in the following way. They take a handful of ears, dry them, beat them small, and cleanse the barley from the bran. Then they bring 1/10 deal to the altar to God, and cast 1 handful of it upon the fire, leaving the rest for the use of the priest. After this they may reap their harvest publicly or privately. At this participation in the first fruits of the earth, they also sacrifice a lamb as a burnt offering to God. When a week of weeks has passed after the sacrifice, those weeks containing 49 days, then on the 50th day, which is Pentecost, and which the Hebrews call Asartha, meaning Pentecost, they bring to God a loaf made of wheat flour of 2/10 deals with leaven. For sacrifices they bring 2 lambs. When these have only been presented to God, they are prepared as supper for the priests, and nothing of them may be left until the following day. They also slay 3 bullocks for a burnt offering, 2 rams, 14 lambs, and 2 kids of the goats for sins. There is no festival on which they do not offer burnt offerings, and on every one of them they also allow themselves to rest. Accordingly, the law prescribes for all the festivals what kinds of sacrifices they are to offer, how they are to rest completely, and that they must slay sacrifices in order to feast upon them. At the common expense, baked bread without leaven was set on the table of showbread, made from 24/10 deals of flour, for that much was used for this bread. 2 heaps of these loaves were baked on the day before the Sabbath. On the morning of the Sabbath, they were brought into the holy place and set on the holy table, 6 in a heap, with 1 loaf standing opposite another. 2 golden cups full of frankincense were also set upon them. There they remained until another Sabbath. Then other loaves were brought in their place, while the loaves that had been removed were given to the priests for food. The frankincense was burned in that sacred fire in which all their offerings were also burned, and new frankincense was set upon the loaves in place of what had been there before. The high priest also offered a sacrifice at his own expense twice every day. It was made of flour mixed with oil and gently baked by the fire. The quantity was 1/10 deal of flour. He brought half of it to the fire in the morning, and the other half at night. I shall give a more accurate account of these sacrifices hereafter, but I think I have already said enough about them for the present. Moses separated the tribe of Levi from sharing the ordinary condition of the rest of the people, and set them apart as a holy tribe. He purified them with water taken from continual springs, and with the kinds of sacrifices usually offered to God on such occasions. He also entrusted to them the tabernacle, the sacred vessels, and the other curtains made for covering the tabernacle, so that they might minister under the direction of the priests who had already been consecrated to God. Moses also made decisions concerning animals, which could be used for food, and which they were required to abstain from. These matters, when this work gives me occasion, shall be explained more fully, and I shall add the reasons that moved him to assign some animals for our food while commanding us to abstain from others. However, he entirely forbade us to use blood as food, because he regarded it as containing the soul and spirit. He also forbade us to eat the flesh of an animal that had died of itself, and also the caul and the fat of goats, sheep, and bulls. He ordered that those whose bodies were afflicted with leprosy, and those who had a gonorrhea, should not enter the city. He also removed women during their natural purgations until the 7th day. After that he regarded them as pure and permitted them to come in again. The law also permits those who have taken care of funerals to come in again in the same way when the same number of days has passed. But if anyone remained longer than that number of days in a state of pollution, the law appointed that 2 lambs be offered as a sacrifice. One of them was to be purified by fire, and the other the priests took for themselves. Those who had the gonorrhea sacrificed in the same manner. But a man who sheds his seed in his sleep, if he goes down into cold water, has the same privilege as those who lawfully have relations with their wives. As for lepers, Moses did not allow them to enter the city at all or to live with anyone else, treating them as if they were in effect dead persons. But if any leper obtained recovery from that disease by prayer to God and regained a healthy complexion, he returned thanks to God with several kinds of sacrifices, concerning which we will speak later. For this reason, one cannot help smiling at those who say that Moses himself was afflicted with leprosy when he fled out of Egypt, and that he became the leader of those who left the country for the same reason and led them into the land of Canaan. If this had been true, Moses would not have made laws to his own dishonor. It is far more likely that he would have opposed such laws if others had tried to introduce them. This is especially so because there are lepers in many nations who are nevertheless held in honor, not only free from reproach and avoidance, but even made great commanders of armies, entrusted with high offices in the commonwealth, and allowed the privilege of entering holy places and temples. Therefore, if Moses himself, or the multitude within, had been subject to such a misfortune in the color of their skin, nothing would have prevented him from making laws for their credit and advantage, rather than placing any difficulty upon them. It is therefore clear that these reports about us arise only from violent prejudice. Moses was free from any such disease, and lived among countrymen who were also free from it. Therefore he made laws concerning others who had the disease, and he did this for the honor of God. But on these matters, let everyone think as he pleases. As for women after they have borne a child, Moses forbade them to enter the temple or touch the sacrifices until 40 days had passed, if the child was a boy. But if she had borne a girl, the law says that she may not be admitted until twice that number of days has passed. After the appointed time already mentioned, when they perform their sacrifices, the priests distribute them before God. If a man suspected that his wife had been guilty of adultery, he was to bring a 10th deal of barley flour. They then cast 1 handful of it to God, and gave the rest to the priests for food. One of the priests set the woman at the gates that faced toward the temple, removed the veil from her head, wrote the name of God on parchment, and required her to swear that she had in no way wronged her husband. She was also to wish that, if she had violated her chastity, her right thigh might be put out of joint, her belly might swell, and she might die in that condition, but that if her husband had been rashly moved to suspicion by the violence of his affection, and the jealousy arising from it, she might bear a male child in the 10th month. When these oaths were finished, the priest wiped the name of God out of the parchment and wrung the water into a vial. He also took some dust from the temple, if any happened to be there, put a little of it into the vial, and gave it to her to drink. If the woman had been unjustly accused, she conceived and carried the child to full perfection in her womb. But if she had broken the faith of marriage with her husband and had sworn falsely before God, she died in a shameful way. Her thigh fell away from her, and her belly swelled with dropsy. These are the ceremonies concerning sacrifices, and the purifications belonging to them that Moses provided for his countrymen. He also prescribed the following laws to them. As for adultery, Moses forbade it entirely. He considered it a happy thing for men to act wisely in the affairs of marriage, and he judged it profitable both for cities and for families that children should be known to be genuine. He also abhorred a man's lying with his mother as one of the greatest crimes, and he held the same view of lying with a father's wife, with aunts, with sisters, and with sons' wives, all of these being acts of abominable wickedness. He also forbade a man to lie with his wife while she was defiled by her natural purgation, to come near brute beasts, or to approve of lying with a male, which he regarded as pursuing unlawful pleasures on account of beauty. For those guilty of such insolent behavior he ordained death as the punishment. For the priests he prescribed a double degree of purity. He restrained them in the matters already mentioned, and in addition forbade them to marry harlots. He also forbade them to marry a slave, a captive, women who made their living by deceitful trades, or by keeping inns, or any woman separated from her husband for any reason whatsoever. He did not even think it proper for the high priest to marry the widow of a dead man, though he permitted this to the other priests. The high priest was permitted only to marry a virgin and keep her. For this reason the high priest is not to come near a dead person, though the other priests are not forbidden to come near their brothers, parents, or children when they die. The priests are to be unblemished in every respect. Moses ordered that any priest who had a blemish should still receive his portion among the priests, but he forbade him to ascend the altar or enter the holy house. He also commanded them to observe purity not only in their sacred ministrations, but also in their daily conduct, so that this too might be blameless. For this reason those who wear the sacerdotal garments are spotless and eminent for purity and sobriety, and they are not permitted to drink wine as long as they wear those garments. Moreover, the sacrifices they offer must be whole and without any defect. Moses gave them all these precepts, and they were observed during his own lifetime. Though he was still living in the wilderness, he also made provision for how they should observe the same laws after they had taken possession of the land of Canaan. He gave the land rest from plowing and planting every 7th year, just as he had prescribed that they rest from labor every 7th day. He ordered that whatever grew of itself from the earth in that year should belong in common to anyone who wished to use it, without distinguishing in that matter between their own countrymen and foreigners. He ordained that they should do the same after 7 times 7 years, making 50 years in all. That 50th year is called by the Hebrews the Jubilee. In it, debtors are freed from their debts and slaves are set at liberty. These slaves had become such, though they were of the same stock, by transgressing certain laws whose punishment was not death, but slavery. This year also restores the land to its former possessors in the following way. When the Jubilee comes, whose name means liberty, the person who sold the land and the person who bought it meet together and make an estimate. On one side, the fruits gathered from it, on the other, the expenses laid out upon it. If the fruits gathered are worth more than the expenses laid out, the seller takes the land back. But if the expenses prove greater than the fruits, the present possessor receives from the former owner the amount that is lacking and then leaves the land to him. If the fruits received and the expenses laid out are equal to one another, the present possessor relinquishes the land to the former owners. Moses wanted the same law to apply to houses sold in villages, but he made a different law for houses sold in a city. If the seller tendered the purchaser his money again within a year, the purchaser was required to restore the house, but if a whole year had passed, the purchaser was to keep what he had bought. This was the constitution of the laws that Moses learned from God when the camp lay under Mount Sinai, and he delivered it in writing to the Hebrews. When this settlement of laws seemed to be complete, Moses thought it proper at last to review the host, because he believed the affairs of war should be put in order. He charged the heads of the tribes, except the tribe of Levi, to make an exact count of those able to go to war. The Levites were holy and free from all such burdens. When the people had been numbered, there were found 600,000 men able to go to war, from 20 to 50 years of age, besides 3,650. In place of Levi, Moses included Manasseh, the son of Joseph, among the heads of tribes, and Ephraim in place of Joseph. This was in accordance with Jacob's own desire to Joseph, that Joseph would give him his sons to be his own by adoption, as I have related before. When they set up the tabernacle, they placed it in the middle of their camp, with 3 tribes pitching their tents on each side of it. Roads were cut through the midst of these tents. The camp was like a well-ordered market, with everything ready for sale in proper arrangement, and all kinds of craftsmen in their shops. It resembled nothing so much as a city that was sometimes movable and sometimes fixed. The priests had the first places around the tabernacle, and after them came the Levites. Since the whole multitude of Levites was counted from 30 days old, they numbered 3,880 males. As long as the cloud stood over the tabernacle, they thought it proper to remain in the same place, believing that God dwelt there among them, but when the cloud moved, they journeyed also. Moses was also the inventor of the form of their trumpet, which was made of silver. Its description is this: in length it was a little less than a cubit. It was made of a narrow tube, somewhat thicker than a flute, but broad enough to admit the breath of a man's mouth. It ended in the form of a bell, like common trumpets. Its sound was called in the Hebrew tongue a sosra. 2 of these were made. One was sounded when they needed the multitude to come together for congregations. When the first trumpet gave a signal, the heads of the tribes were to assemble and consult about the affairs that properly belonged to them. But when both trumpets gave the signal, they called the whole multitude together. Whenever the tabernacle was moved, it was done in this solemn order. At the first alarm of the trumpet, those whose tents were on the east quarter prepared to move. When the second signal was given, those on the south quarter did the same. Next, the tabernacle was taken apart and carried in the middle, with 6 tribes going before and 6 following after, while all the Levites assisted with the tabernacle. When the third signal was given, the division whose tents faced west put themselves in motion. At the 4th signal, those on the north did likewise. They also used these trumpets in their sacred ministrations, when they were bringing their sacrifices to the altar, both on the Sabbaths and on the other festival days. At this time Moses offered the sacrifice called the Passover in the wilderness, the first Passover he had offered after the departure from Egypt.
And there we will pause, with the laws given, the altar smoking, the calendar of the festivals set, and the wandering people handed a way to live that would outlast every empire around them. Josephus has shown us the whole machinery of a holy nation, assembled in a desert. But laws on tablets are one thing, and a frightened people is another. Next time, in Part 4, the close of Book 3, the camp breaks at last from Sinai and marches for the promised land. The spies are sent ahead into Canaan, and what they bring back will cost an entire generation the country it was promised. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.